So, okay, on behalf of IFLA Europe, the European region of the International Federation of Landscape Architects, I want to welcome you all on this third session, third webinar, organized by the Working Group on Agricultural Landscapes. And the topic today is agricultural landscapes, restoration of nature, woodland, and sustainable forest. A few talks about these webinars, and then I will let Francesca Neonato, the chair of the working group, to say more and present our astonished speakers. These webinars, what is the aim? The aim of these webinars are actually what our mission and goal as IFLA Europe is, how we can, through the agricultural landscape working group, how we can show to promote the profession through all these talks, to show really the high standards that we can achieve through our professional experience and education also, and to demonstrate the capabilities of landscape architects on specific topics, but also to show how we can contribute and cooperate with other disciplines for the benefit of all and for our planet. And of course, how we can disseminate at the end everything that we're saying and concluding as statements, as conclusions to Europe, the European Commission, and of course, the Council of Europe. So as you understand, all these topics, apart from informative, they have really a lot of goals. So really, I welcome you all, looking to hear what our speakers from different countries are going to say. So Francesca, I give you now the role to present the group and to present, of course, the speakers, and really welcome you all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Caterina. Welcome to everybody. I'm really honored to have all you here, because today is the third webinar of this series of talk with. I share my presentation, just few slides. What is it? Here is, okay. Okay, this is our fantastic working group with people from all over Europe and from Northern and Southern Europe, East and West. And we had so many nice experience during this year of work together. And especially today we are in this webinar talk with, and we choose this format because we prefer to have some talking very direct with the people directly involved. The first one was the last June with Mr. Sirtius from the DG Agriculture and Rural Development about the future of the public intervention after the new CAP and also the the involvement of the landscape, agricultural landscape. Then in November, we had with the FAO, Secretariat GIAS, about the GIAS program of UA and what happens in 20 years all around the world, and a focus in Europe in particular. And today we have with this this so important host, because we thought that forestry usually are not taken enough in account. It's like the Cinderella of the agriculture world. So what happens all around in Europe? I think that today we will listen to a very particular experience in Iceland and in other countries where is it possible to have timber production in some cases, but also to enhance the biodiversity, to prevent the erosion of the soil and so on? And how is possible also to be involved in this process in which not only is changed the species of the trees, but a full landscape is completely changed also in the perception of the people, and how our profession has the right skills to facilitate and to help this kind of process. So welcome to our host, and I let the the carpet, the red carpet, to Steffi and Frida, that are both involved in the working group of agricultural landscape, to introduce our speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francesca. Yeah, my name is Steffi. I'm going to lead you a bit through this afternoon. I'm a landscape architect from Germany, member of the working group. And I would like to ask Frida to introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you. Yes, it's a great pleasure to introduce Ása Aradottir, professor at the Hvanneyri in Iceland. Ása is an ambitious scholar and very well known in her field in Iceland. She has been a loyal and keen supporter of our landscape architecture profession. And I'm extremely impressed by her projects and methods in restorational ecology and her approach in forestry as well. Her work has a new and exciting sound, and it's not the typical forest methods here in Iceland. As a landscape architect and an environmentalist, I believe that this approach and methods are better suited for our fragile landscape and nature here in Iceland. I'm very interested to listen to Ása, and I know that she is busy. She is preparing a very exciting program, a new master program in restorational ecology at Hvanneyri University, and I hope you will have a look at it, or probably she will tell us a little bit more about that in her presentation. Thank you, Ása, and welcome to our webinar.
Yes, thank you, Frida and Steffi. And thank you very much for inviting me to this discussion. I'm trying to share my screen here. You see my slides now?
Not yet.
Not yet. But there are some signs that they will be here.
It didn't say about the screen sharing. So
okay. So okay. How about now?
yes, now it looks good.
Now you see
yes,
them. Okay.
perfect.
So I'll move on. Okay, so I'm going to talk about mostly restoration of native woodlands for various reasons, and we'll go more into that. But first, maybe a bit about the relevance of ecosystem restoration. Let's see how. We are hearing ever more urgent messages about the state of our planet, as you are probably well aware of. We have exceeded the planetary boundaries in several areas, including biodiversity loss, land use change, climate change, and nitrogen and the phosphorus cycles. And also we get the message that we need to do much better in reducing CO2 emissions to meet the goal of limiting global warming. We also know that with the extensive loss in ecosystems and biodiversity, it is clear that we will not reach the objectives of the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development. With only conserving the ecosystems that we have, a large-scale restoration of damaged ecosystems is needed. And so this is the reason why this decade, 2021 to 2030, has really been declared as the UN decade on ecosystem restoration. And there is a growing focus on the need to jointly address these issues, especially the issue of biodiversity loss and climate change. And of course, they are closely linked to each other and to the condition of the land. You're probably well aware of this landmark agreement made by the last COP of the Biodiversity Convention at the end of 2022. where they agreed to conserve and safeguard the world's ecosystems. And one of the key goals there is to effectively restore 30% of degraded nature. And we are getting a similar message from the Climate Convention, which, as you know, calls for unprecedented systematic changes to reduce CO2 emissions and adapt to climate change. Of course, the big issue here is to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, but it also focuses on synergies with and importance of protecting and restoring nature. And finally, last month, the European Parliament adopted a law that sets firm targets for restoration of at least 30% of habitats in poor condition by 2030 and 90% by 2050. And thus the message is getting stronger. And here we are not only talking about restoration of specific protected areas, but actually we need to restore the whole matrix of landscapes that we live in, the very matrix that you are working with as landscape architects. And this includes forests, agricultural land, peatlands, marine, river, and wetland ecosystems, and also our cities. So it's quite a task, but it is actually quite exciting. But before we go into the actual restoration, I want to just touch briefly upon the definition of ecological restoration and how it works. And here is the definition from the International Society for Ecological Restoration, and this definition has been adopted by many international bodies. And it says ecological restoration is the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. So there are three key words here. We are working with a process or a suite of processes that we assist in order to promote recovery. This means that we are not making ecosystems, but we are facilitating the process of their recovery. And these processes actually take place within the ecosystems, just as, for example, healing of broken bones or wounds in our bodies is the result of different processes that take place within the body. And we can help this process through, or these processes through restoration interventions, but the actual recovery may take years, decades, or even centuries. So here are the key processes that are sort of at the core of restoration. And to facilitate and repair these is what we are trying to achieve. The restoration goals state the reasons for the restoration and the targets that we want to achieve, while the interventions or the restoration toolbox is about what we do to affect these processes in order to achieve the goals. So it's very important to think in terms of processes when we are doing restoration. Now, the term ecosystem restoration has many similarities to ecological restoration, although ecosystem restoration focuses maybe a bit more on societal needs. And here is the definition of ecosystem restoration. The process of halting and reversing degradation, resulting in improved ecosystem services and recovered biodiversity. Ecosystem restoration encompasses a wide continuum of practices depending on local conditions and societal choice. And both ecological restoration and ecosystem restoration emphasize this continuum of restoration activities that range from interventions to reduce impacts and improve ecosystem management.
Hausa, your microphone is switched off. I don't know. Thank you.
Is it on now?
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah. Okay. And then, yes, and from repairing ecosystem function to actually partial and full recovery of native ecosystems. And thus to be considered restorative, activities must improve the current environmental conditions, and activities that result in net loss of biodiversity do not quantify as restorative. So that is something to keep in mind. But I think I let this do as a restoration ecology lesson for the time being, and move to Iceland. We Icelanders often like to talk about our country as the land of ice and fire, but sadly it also has a history of widespread ecosystem collapse. It was settled by Norse Vikings in the 9th century, and the settlers burned and felled the woodlands and brought livestock to the islands, and there were no mammalian herbivores in Iceland before the settlement. And this resulted in extensive deforestation and soil erosion. Over 40% of the country is actually affected by moderate to severe soil erosion. But we also have a long history of restoration or reclamation activities. And actually, we have one of the oldest restoration agencies in the world, the Soil Conservation Service, which is now a part of Land and Forest Iceland. But since its establishment in 1907, the Soil Conservation Service of Iceland has focused on mainly halting and reversing soil erosion. Although in the past few decades, we have been seeing added emphasis on restoration of the key ecosystems of birds, woodlands, and natural wetlands. And that brings us to the woodlands. Birch or Betula pubescens is the only native woodland-forming tree species in Iceland. And the birch woodlands that previously covered at least 1/4 of the country at the time of settlement have been decimated. It has been estimated that at least 95% of the woodland cover at the time of settlement was lost in the following millennium, reaching a low probably very early in the 20th century. And even though the woodlands have started to recover in recent decades, they still cover only about 1.5% of the country. This should be 1.5%. Now, there is interest in restoring these woodlands. I discuss those more later, but the goals of birch woodland restoration are diverse. They are under protection by nature conservation law, and the restoration has really a strong role in the conservation and restoration of native biodiversity in Iceland. Birch woodland restoration has also been identified as an important climate mitigation measure by the Icelandic government. And research has shown that this is actually an effective way to sequester atmospheric carbon dioxide into biomass and especially into soils. Iceland is one of the countries that has accepted the bond challenge, and the country's target is to triple the current coverage of the birch woodlands. And this represents an increase of birch woodlands by 3,500 square kilometers or 350,000 hectares, which is not a small task. And this calls for substantial scaling up of birch woodland restoration. So the question is, how can we do this? Different approaches can be used, but the core idea is to utilize the capacity of natural regeneration in large areas, thus starting recovery of birch woodlands with limited inputs. This is slow to begin with, but it can actually be quite effective where conditions are good. And here is an example of recent research that shows just how effective natural regeneration can be. This map was created by analysis of aerial photos from different periods, and the orange proportion of the map represents an old woodland. that still remains in a matrix of mostly eroded areas. And these remnants remained relatively constant in size until they started to expand after 1990. And especially between 2011 and 2019, when the woodland doubled in size. So what triggered this expansion? To the left of the old woodland, we see that the birds' colonization is not evenly distributed, but actually forms linear patterns that started to show up in the 2011 image. These are the dark red spots here, and then became quite pronounced in 2019. And these linear strips actually reflect revegetation efforts, strips of revegetation by seeding of grasses and spreading of fertilizers on the ground. And these activities stabilized the soil surface of this eroded site and created conditions for birds' pollination by seed that was dispersed from the old woodland. Here is a similar analysis of another area in the vicinity. Here, birds was actually seeded in small patches in the early 1940s. Unfortunately, we don't have the same colors as in the previous slide, but the dark red colors here show that are the oldest occurrences of birds, and they show that the birds had started to spread already in 1960, and that there was more or less an exponential expansion of the woodland after that. So this shows a very strong potential of natural regeneration that we can use in restoration. But if we want to harness this potential, it is important to understand what are the key mechanisms behind it, and what are the main limitations preventing natural regeneration. In open landscapes, as we are working with in much of Iceland, there are two key natural factors or drivers that govern natural regeneration. One is the availability of seed or density of the seed rain, which depends on distance to the seed source. The other limiting factor regards the availability of what is called safe sites for seedling establishment, and this depends on environmental conditions, including availability of resources for the seedling and absence of harmful factors that cause mortality, such as grazing, predators, erosion, etc. Now, currently there is one large-scale birds woodland restoration project ongoing in Iceland, and this project is specifically aimed at improving resilience, and in this case, resilience against tephra associated with volcanic eruptions in Mount Hekla. And Mount Hekla is among the most active volcanoes in Iceland, and we have several of those. The reason for really this emphasis in the project is that volcanic ash, the finest tephra fraction, is easily moved by wind and also maybe water, and it can thus cause extensive disturbance and damage, not only in the area directly affected by the ashfall, but also further away from it. And in Iceland, there are actually many striking examples of widespread erosion events that follow volcanic eruptions. And thus, it is quite important to be able to apply preventive measures. Furthermore, ash and dust storms affect well-being, and they can be a health risk. And here are a few snapshots of areas affected by ash from the Eyjafjallajökull eruption in 2010. This fine ash is really nasty stuff because it's mostly glass, and it has lots of very spiky angles that are not, this is not very good for our lungs. But why use woodland restoration to increase resilience to tephra ashfall? Well, woody vegetation has more resilience to tephra or ashfall than than lower growth forms, and it recovers more quickly. And also, because woody vegetation increases the surface roughness, it reduces wind speed and thus reduces the probability of aeolian movement and thus wind erosion. The possible extent of Hekluskógar is almost 1,000 square kilometers, which is nearly 1% of Iceland. And much of this area is actually in quite poor state. There were extensive woodlands there that have been decimated, and there is active erosion, or when this project started, there was active erosion on about 2/3 of the area. Not all of the area has though been taken under restoration, at least not for the time being, because after deliberation with stakeholder, the restoration was planned for approximately 620 square kilometers of the area. And this is the vision for the project, to restore native woodlands and shrublands that protect agricultural areas and human settlements from secondary ash dispersal and soil erosion that have historically followed ash deposition from Hekla and other nearby volcanoes and can continue to do so. The potential benefits of Hekluskógar are many-fold, not the least the reduction of sandstorms, which, as I mentioned earlier, can be health hazard, but this also just reduces human well-being in the area. And here is a quote from a local farmer that says that we have seen over the years how susceptible the area is to wind-blown sand, and when there is a strong northeasterly wind, we can even see Mount Hekla and are literally with sand in our mouth, just outside our house. But there's also there are other benefits as well, like conserving and restoring biodiversity and to restore essential ecosystem functions, which will increase land use options in the future. But how do we go from eroded land to our vision? Now, the main restoration strategies for this project are to, again, rely on natural regeneration to the extent possible, but with interventions where needed, and especially to assist natural regeneration by increasing the availability of safe sites and by planting small woodland islands to provide seed sources for further colonization where there is no birds nearby. There's also revegetation, and in some areas there are actually more intense interventions of larger scale planting. But these are sort of the main strategies. Establishing woodland islets that can serve as seed sources, and this strategy is sometimes called applied nucleation. Now, many of the unstable eroded areas need to be revegetated before anything else is done, and then, if needed, birds can be introduced once the land has been stabilized. But restoration is not only about natural processes, it is actually very much about people and societies. And one of the first steps in realization of Hekluskógar was to form a group that represented different stakeholders. And this was in order to define the project goals, prepare the planning process, work on finances, etc. And for the first few years, I was leading this stakeholder group, and it was actually a very, very interesting project. Now, in 2007, the project became financed through a contract with the relevant ministries and some private funders. And there was actually a change in the governing of the project. But then we had, in 2008, we had a financial crash and that reduced the funding and caused everything to slow down, even though the project was and is still funded by the government. Hekluskógar have an important role also in the land and life strategy of the Icelandic government from 2022, and of course in fulfilling the pledge to the bond challenge. But most of the work that was done during that preparatory phase was done in different working groups of scientists, GIS people, restorationists, landowners, bureaucrats, etc., etc. Unfortunately, there were no landscape architects in the group, but I think that would have been very helpful. We have to think about that in future projects. When it came to the implementation phase, there was emphasis on planting birds clusters or islets, as I mentioned, but this was also accompanied with larger scale plantations in strategic areas, and the work was done in sections from northeast to southwest to take advantage actually of strong dry winds from the northeast and east for seed dispersal. All operations have been registered, and there is some monitoring of the outcome, although this is mostly monitoring of survival of planted seedlings. Most of the planting has been done by contractors and local landowners, but the revegetation and the direct seeding of birds has mostly been in the hands of the governmental agencies, especially the Soil Conservation Service. Now, many volunteers have participated in the operations, especially the planting. This includes, for example, sports and school groups, NGOs, groups of employees from different companies and agencies, and also individuals. There is also a high number of summer houses in this area, and the summer house owners actually could get bird seedlings to plant in their plots free of charge if they contributed the land, labor, and fertilizers. And this has resulted in some interesting woodland patterns. And I think this could actually work quite well to promote natural regeneration in the vicinity. The outcome so far has been mostly good. There has been good survival and growth of planted birds, but there have been some years where there has been more erosion and there have been some setbacks with that. But for example, after the tephra deposition from Eyjafjallajökull, the plantations recovered quite quickly. And we have been actually doing also some experiments to see how much ash these plantations can stand. We are starting to see spontaneous colonization from the earliest plantings. So we can see that this model seems to be working, but the start is maybe a bit slow. But we are, of course, in a subarctic area, in a highland area, so the conditions are quite harsh. In retrospect, I think there has been too much emphasis on planting and not waiting for natural regeneration, even though we are starting to see it happening. And I think one of the things where we have to improve is to monitor colonization, so we know where colonization is taking place, and we can learn from that. But overall, there has been positive response and interest in the project. There are many people willing to participate and help out. And of course, this provides ownership and fosters a positive attitude. And now the results are becoming more visible, and so this is a potential model for future projects. To achieve the Icelandic government's aim to expand the woodlands considerably in the next decade, we need serious scaling up of restoration. We can use the lessons that we have learned from Hekluskógar for this, but the current practices call for restoration under much more variable conditions. And thus we have established a research and development project that we call Birkivist or Eco-Birds. We started this in 2021, and the aim is to support scaling up of woodland restoration by assessing really the processes of birds colonization. We're doing this in 10 different areas. And from these, we are then developing nationwide predictive models and web viewer for planning of restoration. We're also developing conceptual state and transition models to guide, manage, and evaluate restoration. There is a work on the governance factors and the stakeholder participation related to birds woodland restoration. And finally, there is a part of this project deals with the benefits of woodland restoration for above and below ground biodiversity, hydrology, carbon sequestration, and landscapes, and also aesthetics and the role of birds in literature and arts. Most birds woodland restoration in Iceland deals with restoration of forest cover in areas where the woodland has been lost, but there are also other drivers for degradation of native woodlands in Iceland, including unsustainable grazing and plantations of exotic trees within the woodlands, even some of our key birds woodlands. But so far, though, there is not much discussion of whether or how we can reverse this. So I will be very interested to hear the discussion that follows later in this webinar. But that is all I wanted to say. I thank you for your attention, and I want to thank IFLA for organizing this and inviting me to this discussion. And last but not least, I want to thank the many people, agencies, universities, societies, etc., that have contributed to the work that I have been presenting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elsa. Thank you very much for this interesting perspective that we have on the work that you're doing. It's a completely different view on working with the woodlands, not the conventional forestry, let's say. I have been observing a bit the chat, and there are some questions that I would like to bring up. First, somehow a little more technical questions. There was the question if your presentation could be made available to the participants after.
You mean as a PDF or something like that?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think I could do that. Yes.
Okay, that's great.
So make sure that all the links and all the references are correct.
Yeah.
I could do that.
Okay, that's great. Then one of the questions was, how do you see the role of rewilding in your graph of ecosystem restoration?
I have problems with that we are using many words to describe the same things. I think in many ways rewilding could be a part of restoration. Of course, rewilding often is very much concerned with animal species. And that is because we don't have any wild mammals except the Arctic fox. It is maybe not that relevant, if that answers the question.
Well, I asked to the one who posted the question, so if there's any other comment on that, please go ahead in the chat. I will move on to the next one in the meantime. Are there other tree species than birch suitable to Iceland's ecosystems, which could make forest ecosystems become more diversified?
Unfortunately, no. We are an island, a young, geologically speaking. So birch is the only tree species that forms woodlands. We also have rowan, Sorbus acuparia, in our woodlands, but it never forms dense stands. So, but it occurs there. And we also have willows, of course, and there are a few occurrences of poplar. Now wait, I don't remember. Tremula, I think it is. But no, unfortunately, our flora is not species rich, and that's why there is much pressure on using introduced species as well. But that is not restoration. That is more that is more afforestation or reforestation. But there actually might be negative effects on biodiversity from that. So we have to be very careful about how we approach those.
Yes, yeah, I understand that. Next question that I have here, the participant rights. I had a feeling that you just mentioned landscape architects are indeed usually not involved in ecosystem restoration projects. Which companies do usually implement such projects, and how can one work in the field as a landscape architect?
So usually most of the restoration is done for public money, and most of it is still governed by governmental agencies, although there are contractors that do some of the work. So we don't have restoration companies in Iceland, not yet at least, but that might change. How could we? I would like to involve more landscape architects in our work. I think we just need to sort of foster that discussion.
Yeah, well, that would be certainly of interest, I guess, to the colleagues. And another question, how can now I don't remember, I don't know if I pronounced that properly, Hekluskogar reforestation project effectively leverage the restoration of native birch woodland to mitigate environmental hazards such as the volcanic ash dispersion and wind erosion, while also enhancing local biodiversity and ecosystem resilience in the context of Iceland's unique volcanic landscape?
Well, we have done quite a bit of research in that area that indicates that, yeah, it works for all of these. I mean, once you establish the birds, this is sort of an ecosystem engineer that shapes the ecosystem. That how should I say this? That determines the characteristics and the functions of the ecosystem. So once you have the tree layer, we get these functions, and we have been doing studies, as I said, of above and below ground biodiversity, of carbon sequestration, of the effect of birds on capturing the ash. So it seems to work, but of course when we're working with these natural processes under such difficult conditions, sometimes these processes take time, and that's why we often start with revegetation just to stabilize the soil. But once you get the birds into it, it sort of changes the function of the system.
I see. Okay, last question for the moment, a more general one. When is the best time to visit Iceland because of the flowering flora?
Summer. I mean,
summer.
Yeah, June, July is probably end of June, July into August, maybe the best time. But then it's also then we have the most tourists, the highest numbers of tourists.
I guess so. I guess so.
So it depends.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the moment for answering all the questions. And I would invite you also after to join the panelists to discuss further, which brings us to our next point in the program. And I would like to introduce our panelists that we invited this afternoon. So I will just quickly introduce all of you and then give you the word for your short input before we then start into the discussion. So first, we welcome Selma from the university, Selma Pena from the University of Lisbon in Portugal. She's a PhD in landscape architecture with her with her research focusing on urban and rural landscape planning, soil and water conservation, on assessing dynamic balance of landscapes and the restoration of degraded areas. She's coordinating the thematic line of green and blue infrastructure of the LEAF Research Center. LEAF stands for Linking Landscape Architecture, Environment, Agriculture and Food. And she's been leading and participating in several research projects, of which I guess that we are hearing a bit about later. We also welcome Martin Pigeon, I don't know if I pronounced that properly, researcher and campaigner from FERN, which is an NGO founded in 1995 that engages with the key EU institutions, in particular the European Commission, recognizing the pivotal role in proposing legislation in order to help to shape legislative proposals and advocate forest protection. And we also welcome Matthew King from Vestre, from one of our sponsors, which is a producer of outdoor furniture from Norway with a very strong commitment to sustainability. And he will also introduce a little of his thoughts about this. So first, I'd like to ask Selma to give us her input.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen. Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay. So first, good morning or good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation of being here to share the experience of research in rural areas and rural landscapes. What I'm going to show you is the results of a 4-year research project with which gathered a multidisciplinary team and which was coordinated by landscape architects. First things first, just for you to know a little bit of our country, Portugal has a very diverse landscapes with different kinds of relief. It's very commanded by the diversity of geological formations, and it is in direct relation with the ocean. As you can see in the image, we have different land uses, the agroforestry systems, which is the montado or the dehesa that we call in Spain, in the south with open and smooth relief landscapes. And we have the compartment landscape in the center and in the north region of Portugal. Currently, and looking to this image that we have in the slide, we have about 39% of the territory is forestry land uses, 33 agricultural pastures, 12 shrubs, 8 of agroforestry. So we have a quite big stake of forest land use, and as we can see, 10% is eucalyptus trees in relating to the total area of Portugal, and 11% is maritime pine, both highly flammable tree species. So as we can see in the slide, we have eucalyptus trees from north to south, and from coastal areas to more inland areas. This is the red area that we have here. So the question, what's happening to forest land uses in relation to land morphology and in relation to patch size? As you can see in the graphics on the right, the higher percentage of eucalyptus and maritime pine is located in steep slope areas, which are areas with higher sensitivity in terms of soil erosion and also water conservation. This is a first alert indicator that shows us that both species are generally in inadequate landscape location. Looking to the patch size, which is also very important, we also see that both forest types have larger patch above 100 hectares dominance, like we can see here in the graphic. The data tell us that we have large monocultural areas, so again, a big problem. Two main species that are in inadequate landscape locations and also with a big dimension giving lots of problems. So we are really facing serious problems related with oversimplification of landscape. As you can see here in the image, this is a large monocultural area of eucalyptus. And the problems is soil degradation, biodiversity loss, water scarcity is also related with the wrong land use, and also the increasing of wildfires in terms of the dimension and also in terms of intensity. As we can see in this map, the historic of burned areas that is increasing, and with big, large areas. The pink one was the catastrophic event from 2017. But we see that despite these big problems that we have, we are still having new monocultural plantations. So the perception about the problem, the cause effect, it's not quite completely established. So what, as a landscape architects, we deal also with solutions. So we want to understand what are the landscape planning solutions that we can provide. What is the role of landscape planning in finding solutions for this kind of rural problems that are not only fire problems, but also the other ones of soil conservation, water conservation, and biodiversity, and having secure places for people to live. So by believing that we can play an important role in defining solutions, we developed a research project that is called Scape Fire, with a landscape architecture team together with different specialties. We always work in a big team, gathering different specialties: soil science, geology, vegetation science, architecture, native vegetation experts, participatory and economic evaluation experts. So it was a big project with good and healthy discussions. And we work with development of ecological based methodologies, taking into consideration the green infrastructure and also the ecological network in a multi-scale approach, to be able also to prioritize interventions, understand other species, and co-develop solutions with the stakeholders. So firstly, we develop a landscape planning model, the conceptual model, the idea that has several ideas supporting this design, and take into consideration the topoclimate in fire behavior, the questions of tree flammability, that they are different, the concept of ecological succession, of plant succession, the idea of the land morphology, and the land suitability that is, of course, very related with land morphology. The aim was to develop a fire-resilient landscape, but always together with attaining a goal of proposing sustainable landscape. So it's, in an holistic perspective of taking into consideration the different land uses and the different characteristics of the landscapes. So the result was to develop a conceptual model first, adapted to each river basin, to develop an infrastructure. This infrastructure was based on ecological and also cultural components of the landscapes. And these infrastructures should be planned with fire-resilient land use, such as agriculture, pastures, native broadleaf trees, also mixed woods that compartmentalize landscapes, providing a mosaic landscapes. And with this, we could have diversity in landscapes. Of course, there is also room for exotic species or fast-growing species in this model, but only in the right places, not as a monocultural idea. So this conceptual model was then developed in the geographic information system, and for the different types of landscape, it was settled the possible multifunction land uses, from restoring streams and valley bottoms to restoring the upper areas of the river basin, like the headwater system areas with mixed woodlands, so, or improving the agricultural areas, so a mixed possibilities in accordance with landscape characteristics. The model, as we can see, is like a fractal, since it has been applied in different river basin types, so we can have different dimensions of river basins. from the biggest to the smallest, and we can replicate the model and adapt to each landscape context. In this project, we have applied at the regional, intermunicipal, municipal, and local scales. These are some examples of the process. The result that I bring you here is at the regional scale, with a zoom detail in the right for you to be able to see the detailed information that we have. In the first image, this one is the current land use map, where we see the big areas of eucalyptus and maritime pine monoculture. So the eucalyptus is the pink one, and the maritime pine, Pinus spinaster, is in the light green. We firstly designed the fire land network, which is this one, the fire resilient landscape network. Then we set the potential land uses and the combined land use possibilities for each network, and for the complementary areas that are the white ones, those that are not so sensitive as the fire land network. And afterwards, we compared our potential land uses with the current land uses and developed the landscape transformation plan. So this landscape transformation plan, what has is the areas that should be conserved and those that should be transformed, and in what should be transformed to. The results in central region of Portugal showed us that 35% of these regions should have transformation, should be transformed, that agriculture could increase from 23 to 35%, that native species could be expanded to 31%, and that eucalyptus should be reduced from 17% to 5%. So we know that this is a big reduction, and it's very hard to do it. So what are the alternatives in terms of tree species? We have very diversity when comparing with the other case study that we just heard, because we have different geology, different relief, so we can have different types of species. We work with the natural vegetation potential, so we can have potential vegetation from the different kind of evolution. And we have a big range of alternatives, such as oaks, chestnut trees, strawberry trees, but also other important elements that also give economic benefits, such as mushrooms, aromatic, honey plants, all with economic impacts. So this model application also allows to have phased intervention, which we know that is very important because unfortunately we don't have money for developing all this at the same time. So we can define this, because we are working with the green infrastructure, we can define which are the areas that are priority. Analyzing the region, we can see that, if we only tackled the linear areas, we have 22% as priority, which is lots of area, of course. This would allow to create a fire protection network, but also we could have a landscape restoration plan towards the goals of nature restoration law that already was talked, and also a priority set in the decade of restoration. So another element that is very interesting in working with this data that we produce is that we can have the information of transformation for each parish. So we could have finance prioritized in terms of the best the areas that are urgent for transformation. I am almost finishing. I have only 2 more slides, so sorry, Steffi, I'm finishing. So just to tell you that along the project, we worked in the municipality case studies with local population, with associations, with farmers, decision makers. It was a very fruitful collaboration, and despite the discouragement of local people that was already hopeless in relation to landscape change and having less fires, they recognized the advantage of understanding different alternatives to current land use. They affirmed the importance of valuing other products of forests, such as mushrooms, aromatic honey plants, and strawberry trees. But felt that was fundamental to have technical support to deliver this real change in the field. So they need advices and help to do this transformation. As a taking home message, I just want to say that sometimes we have this kind of categorization that we have conservation forest and production forest. However, the conservation forest is also a production forest. We shouldn't have this categorized. The conservation forest gives enormous benefits in terms of ecosystem services, also products timber. So it's of course we need more time. It's not fast, but we have other benefits. We can also improve landscape quality and attract people for nature tourism. Of course, the question of fire resilience is super important by slowing down the spread of fire. We can create new economies with business creation, with landscape restorations enterprises, native species nurseries, or forest management. And a very important thing that we can have is the guide of landowners. We can help landowners to understand what are the options. They don't need to have only eucalyptus and pine trees. They can have other options, and sometimes they don't know which options they can have and how to do this transformation. So we believe that we need to make this change, to transform landscape from monoculture to native forests. Of course, we have room for everything, but we think that we don't have room for monoculture like this. So thank you very much. It's just a reflection to help.
Thank you, Selma. I think this was a perfect bridge to our next input, which comes from Martin. So Martin, maybe if you want to share already your screen, and please, to all of you, please keep posting your questions in the chat. I will note them down and bring them into the discussion later on. So Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much to IFLA for inviting me. Thank you very much, Selma, for the very inspiring presentation before. Indeed, it resonates a lot with what I'm going to say, which is going to be short. I want to make a quick presentation on continuous cover forestry and its benefits for forest owners, workers, the climate, water, and biodiversity. I'm mentioning all these things because we need to take all of them into account, I think. Very quickly, do you see this very annoying stripe here or not? Because I'm sharing my screen. Just a technical question.
It looks okay.
It looks okay, beautiful. So I want to start with a problem description, which is the situation that we are inheriting, which is the current model of mainstream forestry, which, as you've heard already, is largely imported from agriculture. It consists of monoculture, of plantations of one species, and they are harvested like in agriculture, that is through clear cutting. You cut all the trees in one single area, removed at the same time, and to accelerate the transition, you plant tree seedlings, typically of a single fast-growing, commercially attractive species. And that type of forestry is the main problem that we have in Europe's forests today, because it is destroying the EU forest ecosystem, it's depriving the wildlife of their habitats, it's undermining forest soil's ability to retain moisture, it's worsening the air quality, and it's increasing the soil erosion and carbon dioxide emissions. So today, the situation we have is very problematic. So this is an illustration, actually, of that model. You can see on the first, in the first part of the picture, a recent clear cut where all the trees have been removed and the soil is laid bare, almost. The second part of the picture is a plantation of young seedlings, and you can see that they're all planted like a maize corn, like a maize field, for example, like all neatly in a row. But this is not a forest. This is a tree of fields, in fact, a field of trees, excuse me. And on the background, you have adult plantations, but most of them are also a plantation. The consequence is that the forests are overlogged and they are too exploited. The consequence you have in the middle here is that the EU land sink, that is the ability of the land sector and particularly forest in Europe to capture carbon from the air, is decreasing, and has been decreasing actually very fast in the past decade. And also a very recent study, which is very important, published in December last year, is that for the first time we start measuring that the tree canopy extent, that is the especially the annual tree canopy removal area, increased by 18%. So that means that the total area of adult forest is decreasing. And this is remarkable because that is an argument that you hear very often from the forestry industry, is that the total forest area is increasing. And it is true. The size of forest has been increasing in Europe since the very, very, very low point that they had reached in the middle of the 19th century. But a lot of that expansion is because we have reduced the logging, and unfortunately, as I said before, a big part of that extension has not been through recovery of natural forest, but through the planting of monoculture tree plantations. Now, on more inspiring perspective, there is a commercially viable alternative to this model, which is continuous cover forestry. Continuous cover forestry, it's all, as the name says, is the fact of harvesting trees in a way that never breaks the forest cover. In a way, you could say that it is a traditional form of forestry, but calling it that way would not be completely adequate either, because this form of forestry requires a lot of knowledge that our ancestors didn't have, or it was not exactly the same knowledge, at least. And the goal of that form of forestry is to produce the best possible quality wood. So the total volumes of wood are actually a little less. But the idea is that because you use natural regeneration, because you use the natural cycles, you're spending much less capital, actually, to maintain the forest stand. You are spending more in human labor on the other way, because this is a practice that is a lot driven by observation. And it has very important consequences for the particular situation in which we are. The idea is that by keeping always the forest cover, you limit the thermal amplitude, so you limit the changes of temperature. You maintain, which is very important, the moisture levels in the sound. You slow down the wind, this we have heard from the first speaker. And you provide young trees with a protective environment that they need in their early years. This is very important because even the commercial monoculture model based on planting is experiencing a lot of problems at the moment because of climate change. In France, the country where I come from, the annual mortality rate in plantations now is around 38 to 39%, which is really a lot, which is too much, actually. It means that you have to replant, and you're never sure that the trees that are going to survive. Two images in this slide. One on the right is a graph that shows that, sorry, it's in French, but it shows you that the stand is maintained at the you only have like very small regular cuts, and so you keep the cover, as opposed to a growth, and a total cut in clear cutting. On the left side, you have an image that comes from my past work, actually, on water, and that I've always found extremely inspiring. It comes from the work of a Slovak scientist called Michal Krawczyk, and he's the author of the new water paradigm, Water for the Recovery of the Climate. And it starts from a very simple analysis of the small water cycle and what it does to local temperature. On the right, on the upper strand, you have a satellite picture, and on the lower, you have just a measurement of the temperatures. And you can see, which is not very surprising, that when you have a water body with a forest nearby, the temperature remains very, very cool. Whereas when you Of course, the worst is when you have concrete. This is the red dot here. It's the hottest, but you can see that when you have all the land that is being cleared, such as here, the temperature goes very high as well, which is why actually all the young trees are dying in monoculture plantations, or in any plantation actually for that matter, is because they cannot withstand this kind of high temperature. Other advantages is that, of course, you're always using the tree in continuous cover forestry. You're primarily working with the native forest, with the trees that are growing spontaneously. So they are the best suited to the local pedoclimatic conditions. The whole system is much more resilient. It's much better at resisting pest infestation, for example. And also in terms of basic economic risk, it generates cash flow continuously, as opposed to a lot of money just every 60, 70 years. You can see how this is a much better way of managing risk, especially now. I really wanted to show you because I'm not a forester myself, for all I would wish to, but I very strongly encourage you to go and have a look at this video that we have done with practitioners, with foresters that are practicing actually this form of continuous cover forestry, because this way they can explain that to you. In the video, it's called Close to Nature Forestry, but actually for information, in policy, terminology is very important, and close to nature is a bit too vague, and that's the reason why we're talking about, upon the recommendation actually of practitioners and foresters themselves, we are now talking about continuous cover forestry because it much better describes what really we want to encourage. And because video presentation through Zoom won't work, I will invite you to watch this video after, and I will show you my last slide. No. Thank you. Which is a few last messages and a recommendation. One, because is that climate change is a global phenomenon, but it is also a local phenomenon, and that is very important to understand, and few people understand that well. There's a recent paper here, and that's where the images are coming from. I will send you the PDF for that presentation after, and all the images have a link that goes to the source. This shows that in the United States for the past century, because in the Southeast, there was a lot of, it's called reforestation, but it's just that the logging has been reduced because people have started using fossil fuels much more. So the pressure on forest has really reduced. As a result, the forest has expanded, and as a result, you can see that the average evolution of temperatures in that region of the US is opposite to the rest of the country. It actually became cooler in that part of the country as opposed to the rest. That's at the sort of very large scale, but at the local scale, you also observe that. This small scheme figure here is just a reflection of the picture that I was showing you earlier. Now, this one of the main drivers, I didn't mention that, but my main job at Fern is to work on bioenergy and the very unfortunate incentives in EU legislation to burn wood for energy production. We need forests alive much more than the energy from burning them. We have much better ways of producing energy today than burning wood. There are also important issues around that linked to the financing. A lot of the money that's available at the moment to plant trees, for example, comes from carbon markets, and that has very problematic consequences. And I very strongly encourage you to read this recent paper in Nature Water, which is very aptly called More Than Carbon Sticks, which really explains very well that I'm quoting here, the concept that planting trees will help mitigate climate change by storing CO2 is too simplistic. It ignores the large effect that plants have on the water cycle. So careful restoration of native plant ecosystems can rebalance that cycle for the mitigating climate change while also reducing flood and drought extremes. There is a corollary to that. Sorry, I'm going very, very fast, and I'm going to end very soon. This slide, this image on the top right corner is actually very important. I was not aware of that before starting my work at Fern. is that about 30% of the excess carbon, CO2 actually, that is in the atmosphere today does not come from fossil fuels. It comes from past deforestation and land use change, the draining of wetlands and all of that. And that has a very important practical consequence. It means that the greenhouse gas emissions that can be captured through nature restoration can only compensate, recapture the past greenhouse gas emissions from nature destruction. You cannot compensate fossil fuel emissions with nature restoration. That is the very important message that I want to convey to you here. That has very important implications for policy. And we need to, I'm jumping a bit, but that's because all these are very, very important messages that I wanted to convey to you. Selma just before me hinted to that, but this nature versus humans frame is really, really problematic, and we have to stop feeding it. That is the one that is actually causing the problem and enabling the destruction of nature in the first place. Forests all over the world have always been and still are inhabited. So the point is to heal the relationship we have to them, not to isolate ourselves from them. Because we have been co-evolving, forest and us, for the many, many centuries, and we need to continue doing it, but doing it in a better way. Just a small message from my past work on water, but that's related to what Selma just said. It's on the local dimensions of climate change. Like, you really want to multiply the sponges in the local water cycle that are able to slow the small water cycle and to retain rainwater. That means forest, wetlands, etc. Because that's how you create fire-resilient landscapes. And I don't need to say more because Selma before me said it much, much better, actually. And last, but probably not least, and this is why I'm very inspired by listening to the presenters this morning, is that it's really in healing this relationship that we have to nature. It's really important that we start treating ecosystems as systems and not as an inventory. That requires breaking silos of specialization that we have, and we're not very well equipped, unfortunately, as a society to do that. And this is where actually professions like architects, like artists, like designers might help a lot, actually, because their job is to see and analyze systems. With the help of voters, because we have upcoming EU elections. And I think it is really, really, really important that we tell ourselves and our friends and our communities that the votes that people have very concrete choices on the decisions that are being made on this. Are we going to elect people who prefer force, speed, and authority, or are we going to elect people who prefer listening and co-evolving with others? I'll leave you with that.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very good last phrase. And I just realized I didn't want to interrupt, and I think I didn't, the time is running up, but I think it was very, very, very well worth it to let you finish with your slides and information. So I would like to ask now Matt to give his presentation. Unfortunately, we are somehow almost at the limit, but I think it's totally worth it to sort of schedule a part 2 of this discussion. So if you are interested in that, please let us our feedback in the chat. If some of you are still up for a discussion, please stay tuned. And for the time being, we listen to Matt and his presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Steffi, and thank you to all of our previous speakers. I can't actually see my slides, which is never a good thing. How's it for you?
If you can make it full screen.
Ah, yes, that's it. That's it.
Yes, perfect.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to segue on from some of the discussion previously made, particularly around production and extraction, because that's where we sit at Vestra. So I'll talk for about 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes, conscious of the time. But when we talk about sustainable forestry, what naturally doesn't spring to mind is street furniture. But that's partly the angle I'd like to approach today's topic, more specifically from a perspective of manufacturing, as that's where Vestra sits. And so touching on that point around the relationship between humans and nature, and more specifically businesses and nature. We're a Norwegian outdoor street furniture designer, maker, manufacturer, and slowly over the last 75 years have become known as one of the world's most sustainable outdoor furniture companies. How we got there is through investing in innovation, but also through our internal desire to make change, which we did consistently over this time, and more specifically and intensively over the last 10 years. So for us, 3 main points exist and all orbit around this sort of central core of what we believe 21st century business should try and achieve, which is for a coherent long-term social and environmental strategy to run alongside the commercial objectives of business. So for example, that could be investing profits in new technology, certifications, decarbonisation. And by adopting this approach, we can collectively improve the relationship between material and resource management, biodiversity, and hopefully reduce any sort of or mitigate adverse external impacts. And through our experience as a business and as a manufacturer, we've seen that you can make profit, you can grow as a business, but you can also reduce the intensity of your environmental impact. So for us, branching out of these sort of issues around what we feel a 21st century business can achieve, one of the major areas is scaling circular models. And for us, I think every business is unique, but for us as a manufacturer, it's about taking accountability for the entire product life cycle. So firstly, having products and furniture that lasts over time and is durable, but crucially, that can also be refurbished and remanufactured. Our biggest challenge actually is not timber, but it's mitigating the external costs of using steel. For us, that makes up 60% of our carbon footprint. And so the use of steel really raises the importance of the Vestra Vision Zero, which is about creating a longer life cycle and being fully responsible for end of life as well. So because of that upfront carbon footprint of steel, it really puts the impotence on the Vestra Vision Zero. Steel does come at a higher cost in terms of carbon, but also with a greater opportunity because it has a long lifespan, and taking accountability for that lifespan and the opportunities around that, we can actually look to extend it. But this approach also benefits timber management as well, as we will have clear recycling partnerships in place for timber when it naturally sort of comes to end of life. And so the way we see this Vestra Vision Zero is really in a hierarchy of needs, and the complexity and the cost does typically grow the more detail you go into. But at the top level, you would first look to create a care and maintenance scheme. So for instance, using materials that are naturally long lasting and maybe finishing them with processes such as linseed oil infusion and things like that can actually extend the life of the materials that you're using. And then it's about repair and actually fixing things, preferably in place. We ship globally across the world, so it's not really feasible or friendly to bring that back too often. So we try and repair it in situ if anything goes wrong. And then also actually refurbishing it and, having a warranty scheme that allows us to ensure products last an X amount of time, and actually replacing, any wood that may come to that natural end. And then finally, and more, the most complex part and most costly part is actually remanufacturing. And this is a model that hopefully all manufacturers can one day get to. And that is actually about taking back products, furniture, whatever's been made at end of life, and taking it back, either recycling it properly, upcycling it, and reselling it. So really closing that loop on the life cycle there. So transparency and traceability is also a key to progress for us. This doesn't just reflect how we work internally. We try and be very transparent internally, but also actually in the way that we share our findings with customers through our yearly impact reports. And, you know, we found it to be really valuable. We work with architects, we work with developers, we work with landscape architects, and quite often they are also really, you know, working really hard to try and understand levels of carbon, origin, life cycle analysis. And so actually by conducting some of this research and doing some of this work and sharing it with the industry, you know, I think we can view that as an area of collaboration as well. So as I mentioned, steel makes up 60% of our carbon. Timber only makes up about 5% of our embedded carbon. So the issue really, when it comes to timber for us, isn't necessarily about carbon, but it's about management of the timber. And so for over the last 4 years, we've moved 98% of our wood stock into the FSC stock. We have about 2% remaining, which is partly down to cost and demand. Those two often go quite hand in hand. You know, in another sense, our customers aren't prepared to pay the additional cost on ash and oak, which are the only ones left at the moment that aren't sort of fully FSC. However, by 2030, we hope to have this, you know, as 100% achieved. And it should be noted as well as a business, you know, as we've moved our wood stock into FSC, we've also grown in revenue and sort of stature across the world as well. So there's been a positive impact for us in doing that. Another element for us is about deep decarbonisation. So really what this boils down to is the delineation growth as a business, which is shown in revenue here, and carbon intensity. So naturally as a business, well, historically as a business has, you know, as businesses grow, typically carbon would increase in a linear fashion along with the level of profit or revenue or general growth. And so what we're trying to do as a business is actually delineate that, because it's not necessarily realistic to assume that businesses shouldn't grow and aren't growing. And so the real issue here is about delineating carbon from that growth. The carbon that we measure is in 3 scopes. So the first is scope 1, which is the direct emissions from the company. So that's things like the factory, the use of machinery, transport. The second scope is the indirect emissions. So that's some, you know, like if we were to purchase electricity from the grid, you know, the carbon around that. And scope 3 is the indirect emissions from our supply chain. You know, so this can be anything from global transport, business travel, to actually the goods and services that we buy. And without a doubt, scope 3 is the biggest. It's 98% of our emissions as a company. And it's also the most complex scope to reduce and requires, you know, really wide scale, deep collaboration. And actually this year, we've just started workshops with our supply partners to actively tackle this issue about decarbonising our supply chain. Other ways we're raising transparency is on a product level is through these product passports. This is to show where, you know, each part of the whole have come from and where they're going. And this really does sort of supplement and feed into our Vestra Vision Zero. You know, what you could expect to see from these passports is the journey of the materials being used. And particularly with the Vestra Vision Zero in there, you know, you could expect to see steel that has been used on furniture in maybe New York, that has then had a 50-year life, been transported back to the factory, stripped back, re-powder coated, re-hot dip galved, and then sent off elsewhere to a project in Barcelona. And so, you know, it really creates this journey that the customer can see. It builds narrative, and it acts as a sort of postcard of travels for the material.
Sorry, Matt, if I have to rush a bit, but if you could finish in about 1 or 2 minutes, that would be great.
Fine, yeah. So the biggest challenge with timber is actually harmonizing the harvesting, the biodiversity, and the life cycle, which some of the speakers have alluded to as well. But sustainability can mean many, many things. So we really try our best to align ourselves with broader certifications and credentials. It adds transparency, credibility, and eradicates greenwashing. Quality and longevity is a huge part of the topic as well, particularly around extraction. You want things to last a very long time. Nordic pine is the preferred choice for us. It grows very slowly over about 80 to 120 years. It's also a very suitable outdoor timber. Scandinavian forestries are among some of the best in the world, and typically, you know, Scandinavia is at the forefront of that. So felling virgin forest is prohibited in Scandinavia. Timber production has doubled over the last 100 years. And so really, we've also been beneficiaries of that wider ecosphere, and really points to the issue that it requires not just business investment, but also economic investment. Processes such as linseed oil infusion can increase the lifespan of timber, which is how we use these oils. We don't use tropical hardwood, so we use an engineered timber, which is a softwood equivalent that is then chemically transformed into a hardwood. We have a maintenance team that goes around and basically prolongs the life of the timber by reapplying oils and fixing on site. And just to finish, I suppose the pinnacle of our progress so far has been the Plus, which is our factory. It's one of the first BREEAM outstanding factories in the world. It's surrounded by 3,000 square meters of preserved pine forest, which we are now leaving to rewild. There's access to the green roof and factory 24/7. And the building, the factory actually has a lower energy consumption of about 60% to equivalent conventional factories. And just a quick story to finish. Last time I was there, we were on the factory roof, and we were having a factory tour with the Vestra team. And you know, the skies were blue, the air was crisp and clean, and you know, you can quite literally hear the sort of the bird song coming out of the forest. And I remember turning and looking across the roof and seeing a guy walking his dog across the roof. And it kind of stopped me in my tracks, because it's not something that you'd expect on a factory roof. You know, we're doing a tour in the middle of the forest, and he stopped and he took in the view, he took in the sounds, he took a deep breath and carried on at a Sunday's pace. And that really is what dawned on me. You know, that's what business can be. It can be profitable, it can be based on growth, but it can also be about community, people, and safeguarding nature. So that even something as industrial as a factory can still be a place someone chooses to walk their dog. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I think that was we closed kind of a circle now from the reforestation or the to the projects that we've seen in Iceland and all the projects in Portugal, the explanations that Martin gave us, and also now to how sustainably use the wood actually. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and there's not really time for discussion, and I'm terribly sorry about that, but I think we all received a very good, valuable input. So I hope that we don't leave you with too many open questions, but at this point, I just think that it's a good sign for the fact that we have to continue with this topic and look at it from different angles. And we are the Agricultural Landscapes Working Group, but this is also including forestry and woodlands. And this is a topic which should come more into focus. So there's just left to thank you all for your participation, especially our speakers. Thank you so much for your time and input. It was really, really valuable and interesting. And we would be very happy to receive your presentations, if it's possible, for copyrights and things. So if you can send them to us as a PDF, if possible, we can make them available to our participants. Because I think there's also a lot of good sources to read deeper into the topic. So we would be very grateful for that. So thank you all. I would like to give back the word to Francesca for a farewell, and thank you all from my side.
Thank you, Steffi. Thank you to everybody, and especially to our speakers. Very, very interesting. I knew before that it was a stone launched in a pond, because the reaction from everybody is really very, very interesting. For instance, there is another question, please note, Steffi, about the impact of tourism in this kind of afforestation project. So we will continue with the series. So the next one will be in next September, but we don't want to spoil the issue, so we will communicate later, but have a look on IFLA Europe website, because there are a lot of news, especially is available the book of the photo contest that we had launched 2 years ago, and the next one edition will be launched in a few days, and it's about people and rural traditional landscape. So have a look on it and send